What would you say your current relationship is with grief and mourning? I think immediately you would probably bring yourself to experiencing a death of a loved one. And if you haven't had a death of a loved one, maybe you're thinking to yourself, like, I don't have any relationship with grief or mourning. Maybe you have a grief and similar mourning experience over a national tragedy, or you could relate to having a really bad breakup. Because I don't believe that grief and mourning are only limited to the experience of what you feel after death. I think that we don't necessarily give ourselves the grace to say that I am in mourning. I do not know how to deal with these feelings. I'm so sad. And it's usually when it comes after things like a job loss, when you're relocating, when you're having a breakup. And I think what I want to touch base on the most is that when you're going through any type of spiritual awakening or self-discovery, or you are making any kind of even health changes in your life, there is a version of you that is literally dying off. You're no longer going to be a people pleaser. You're changing your jobs. So whoever you were in that identity is quite literally dying. When you're going through shifts in the spiritual world, you might find that a lot of your decisions and your actions were somebody else's behaviors and programming and patterns that what you said was part of your belief, you come to find out is actually just more of a behavior to limit the pain, or to avoid the relationship conflict. So the version of you that was showing up around those relationships is you're trying to change that version of you. So not only are you killing off that identity, the people around you that are used to that identity are also losing that version of you too. So there's something along the lines of like, boundaries only piss off people who it benefits them for you not to have any boundaries. So this version of you that they love is now a version of you that you're attempting on purpose to get rid of. So imagine when you lose somebody you love, the pain of it being sort of ripped away from you. And now you're in this experience where you're literally doing everything you can. And if you are doing it diligently, it almost feels like every second of the day you are killing off a version of you just by making a different decision. And I don't know if that part is looked at enough of what it feels like when you're doing that spiritual work and the grief that comes with it. I remember many times throughout the years talking to my girlfriends as we're all going through other versions of ourselves that we would say, it just feels like my identity is just melting off of me. And while it might sound like a relief to some people depending on where they are in their journey, it is fucking painful. It's painful to change jobs. It's painful to have breakups. And these things are not death. Yes, after a couple years or months or so, you could see that it was actually a rebirth, which is really interesting to me because we don't know what's on the other side of death, like the human death of dying, but we're so afraid of it. And so even when we're changing something for the better, we're still afraid of it. It's still the unknown, and the unknown might just be represented by death. And perhaps it makes sense that, like, when you're going through those stages of the unknown, it would hurt. Even if whatever you were doing before hurt you a lot, it's still a familiar hurt. And so now you're in a whole different pattern of hurting. And so you go through these stages, and maybe you've heard of, like, in the mainstream, like the stages of grief being denial and anger and all of these things. But on a sidebar, when you're going through your spiritual work and you're excavating the bullshit that's inside of you that you don't want to keep anymore, or you're putting up boundaries for relationships that are not healthy, and these sort of things can cause a lot of anger and a lot of resentment and just feelings that just don't feel spiritual. Like, you're not supposed to feel that way. Like, an enlightened being of love and light, if that's the direction you're going in, is not supposed to feel like that. But I mean, like, I'm not a Christian or here to tell you that, like, Jesus, yada, yada, but I think it's really great teaching. And, like, Jesus was angry. And some of the stories, he flips the table over. Sometimes anger is a feeling that we need to acknowledge, accept, and respect. There's a beautiful quote that says, anger is just sadness's bodyguard. And mourning and grief are sadness, anguish. You know, it's that, it is just, it's so painful. It's whatever other word you think that you can put with it. But when it comes to something like losing a job or a partner, or honestly, even when we lose a death, we are not necessarily so quick to jump to our own grace and be like, it's okay for me to feel sad, and I'm gonna just like let it play out however it is. We usually go into a different mode, a survival mode, technically, if you will. So if your family members died, you go right into like saving the day, comforting others, because you're so strong and everybody else is so weak that you need to be the strong one to comfort them. How does that sit with you? I would say there's so much to dissect there. But for you to say you're strong to handle everybody else who's sad, but denying your own sadness, but giving grace to other people who are sad, these type of contradictions really keep us stuck in our experience. So now you're the martyr, but you made yourself the martyr. And now you have this experience where you're not allowed to be sad, but other people are allowed to be sad. And I say this for myself. I have had this experience. In every case where a death happened to me a lot when I was younger, like at 15, my favorite person died, and then it was like another death, another death, another death, another death. And then as I got older, it was like suicides and overdoses and these sort of things that were just overwhelming. And nobody around me knew how to deal with it. So nobody gave me any tools. And in fact, they really expected me to just like keep moving on like everything was normal, which I think really kind of fucked up my relationship with dealing with hard things and dealing with grief. It made sense to be like, well, I'm strong and I have to get through it and resilient. But like, nobody said that resilience doesn't come with tears. Why do you have to do hard things and not cry or not feel it? And so there was, are you strong or are you numbing? Because to numb grief sounds like a solution, but the reality is that shit is not a solution. If you don't deal with it, it is going to deal with you. And this is a life human experience. I think it's inescapable. And I think that we're not given enough tools to how to deal with it. And so one, I would say that the most important thing we can do with dealing with grief is to add grace. I don't care if you're dealing with somebody else or you're dealing with you, if you're dealing with a job change or dealing with a partner change. If you're doing any type of spiritual practice, or if you just don't understand, like, how do I get through this pain? The reality is life is painful. And if you lost somebody that you love more than anything in the world, the pain might not ever go away. But we have to have some type of tool for relief. And so relief, even though you've heard like truth hurts and you know, swallowing truth is like choking on it, it at least starts to get you on the path. So let's just say, you know, you find it easier to walk along the path of you're on a 7-way highway and you're walking it. But the relief or tools for grief and mourning at least get you in the bus or on the sidewalk where you're safe, where you could find relief, where you're not in such a survival mode, where you could calm down and be like, I am in such a survival mode that it means that I don't necessarily have to do everything at once. As a matter of fact, when we're in grief and mourning, we tend to turn to like workaholicism, escapism, and these sort of things, when the reality is we're trying to avoid a pain that, unpopular opinion, and only do you have to experience it a couple times before you know that it's true, that if you feel this pain and you allow yourself to feel it, it will not last forever. In fact, it will last less if you look at it and give it some grace. Of course I am sad and devastated from a breakup. Of course I am sad and dealing with these changes of going through a new career or switching jobs, even if you chose it, right? Even if you wanted to break up with your boyfriend or girlfriend or partner and you think that was the best thing for you, just because it hurts, it doesn't mean it's wrong. Same thing with a job. You make a job change and it's really challenging and you have to learn a whole lot of things about yourself. It doesn't mean that it's wrong. And for a long time, I had a hard time saying that everything that I'm a change tornado and death surrounds me and I feel like I'm in and out of grief and mourning because I'm always changing. And at times I would say I didn't have, even just recently, I felt like I couldn't tell people basically that I was sad and struggling with the change because I chose it. And I think that was doing me a disservice, because it's okay to say that, like, when you make a change, it's still gonna hurt. Like, if you're gonna go to the gym and change your body, like, you're gonna be sore. And so I was just being really strong, and it's not a strength to pretend like the feelings don't exist. So if you're like me and you like to make changes and then tell yourself that you chose this and this is supposed to be okay, it's also okay if it hurts. There's a really darker side of learning about yourself when death comes on your doorstep, when somebody passes that you had conflict with, or somebody that hurt you, or somebody that you were estranged from, or anywhere in that sort of realm. Your mourning and grief is in its own category, right? So like, you made the changes in this other way, change your job, change your career, you know, that was sort of empowering. You could still feel like, I don't know how to deal with these feelings, yada yada, but like, you chose it, and maybe you felt like you had some kind of closure. Grief and mourning on the other side, where again, somebody had possibly hurt you in any way, shape, or form, and then they die, and you basically fucking hate them. And maybe you are faced with the feelings of, you know, maybe that person should have died, they deserved it, good riddance. And then you have to look at that same concept of, you are now saying, good riddance, that person should have died, and like, maybe you didn't want to be that person. But there is so much pain and mourning and grief because of what that person did when they were alive. You were still not able to process it and deal with it. Now they're dead. Now you feel like you never ever can. Well, the good news about grief work is the other person doesn't have to be involved for forgiveness. You don't need the other person to receive your forgiveness. You just need to release yourself of it, and that's a longer process or conversation. But if it makes sense to just know that there is freedom on the other side, you don't need to, you know, do a seance and contact the dead in order to say to your dead relative that you forgive them or you fucking hate them, actually. But mourning and grief do offer that perspective to show you who you are and what's really true here. Excuse me. I've had a lot of people in my life die recently, and oftentimes it's, I don't want to say it's always suicide, but the two I'm thinking about are suicide and or overdose in order, I mean, you die from an overdose, but you're seeking this relief of death. And so when I think about, one, we're shown how to deal with grief, right? Like, maybe we're seeing on a movie, or maybe our families show us how to deal with it, or, you know, maybe we deal with it in such a strong, non-emotional way that we feel like we're supposed to cry, or maybe we cry for the show of it, but we feel like we don't need to cry. This could be one or the other, or true. This has been true and false for me through various people dying. In fact, when my grandma died when I was much younger, we were really, really close, and I felt like I was already witnessing the unseeable energies in the world, whether I didn't know what it was. At that point, I had just started dabbling in Christianity. So, then I might have called it the Holy Spirit. Always been seeking whatever that mystery is. And I witnessed my grandma dying, and I witnessed what I couldn't witness, the sensations, the energy, her presence, just so much more to explain. And when she passed, of course, everybody in my family was devastated. And I'll never forget, I never felt a bigger sense of relief and love and joy. And I mean, my grandma was with me still. Like, I felt like when her last breath in her body was taken, I could feel her energy stronger, just like right here. And I remember that day, I was only 20 maybe, I'm not sure exactly. And I went for a bike ride, and I remember singing and just feeling joy and delight. And perhaps it was her feeling joy and delight and telling me that this is a good space, place. She was free, not sick and pain anymore. And it made sense that everybody else was struggling with, they had lost her. And maybe they didn't have enough time, or they didn't say what they wanted to say, or it really does turn around on you, or you had a memory that now is never going to play out because this person's passed. And maybe you realize when people die that you might have done better behaving differently and communicating differently, and you wish you would have said something or forgave them when they were here. There is a lot that goes on in your internal world when someone dies. And we're taught kind of how to do that. And so at times, I remember I felt like I was supposed to cry and be really sad. And then there was times where I was like, that makes sense to me. So sometimes I'm still figuring it out. But when my friends have died from suicide or overdoses, I also couldn't help but to feel relief for them. Yes, I was sad. I was heartbroken that they were so sad and they felt alone and lost. I also think, though, that when you get to that place, it's your choice. I hate, this is a controversial thing, but at that point, I couldn't be so devastated and sad of like, it's very easy for some people to be like, I should have saved them. No, again, here you are thinking that you're stronger than them and you need to save them. When the truth is, we all have our own inner world that we're struggling with. And when somebody else maybe takes their life, we're faced with the times where we were like, what are we doing? Nobody has to necessarily be suicidal in the deepest, darkest sense to just think sometimes about what is this life. And, and you could feel really grateful and happy for yourself when you get over those humps and be like, what? I thought there wasn't a point in life, and then this day is beautiful. And it does come into play that when somebody can't see the light like that, and you do, God damn it, you better take advantage of it, use it, be grateful for it. Like, if they don't have it, which is it's devastating, but it's almost like your burden and your duty that if you have the ability to reach the light, then you just fucking hammer it. And I think that is in a way what happened when I was 15, and when he passed, he was 21. My first person that I ever loved more than anything passed. And I remember being like, he never got to do any of the things. He missed out on so much. I don't know how life works, but back then I was like, I'm fucking going for it. Like, I wasn't very scared of death after that. And I felt like I needed to live for him. And so there was times I ended up traveling the world, and I didn't bring like his ashes with me, but there was some times where I was like, he feels with me a lot of times for 27 years. I don't know, it's been a long time. I was 15, I'm 27, 22 years. And when he first passed, there was a moment where I was 100% sure that I was going to be connected to his energy as long as I wanted to be, basically. So I traveled the world, and I always thought to myself, like, if he's still with me, then he gets to see this too. And so Not everybody has that experience. I think sometimes it's easy to be more frightened and fear death and feel like you have to do everything you can to avoid it and arrive to death safely. And I know that there's two truths, which I think is really telling of everything, that there's a truth that yes, if somebody died scuba diving, then maybe you would avoid scuba diving. But that person fucking loves scuba diving. And like, why do they love it? And like, under those things, like, if they're gonna die of anything, like, fucking cool. They die doing the thing that they loved. And so I have somebody in my life that I think their dad died from scuba diving, and they recently took it up and then fell in love with it. And it was like, of course. It is like, that's the most beautiful experience. That's why the person loved it. So, we tend to do things out of fear. But I think that death can really offer you two perspectives. I think if death is the fear of the unknown, and I personally believe that we give ourselves too many limits and we only end up with this many options because of our minds not being able to see another perspective or broaden, or even having empathy to hear somebody else's story and allow that to be a possibility for our life. We plan everything and we fixate it so much that we don't realize that we have no control, and life is like breathless. Like it's measured by breath, right? So breathe deeply, acknowledge that there's so many possibilities. And so I think for me, the limitless possibilities gives me a lot of peace. And when I understand that gives everybody else a lot of fear. And I think that the way that I've seen death happen and the way that I've experienced the switching over of change so much, one of my teachers calls it resurrection addiction. There's some truth to that for me, that I think that, if I have an experience of death, I think I solidly have an equal, if not greater, experience of rebirth. So it's all in how you choose to see it, all in how you choose to say, okay, well, it was only this option, and I'm scared of anything else. Or there's so many options that the one option I'm really scared about is balanced with infinite plus one, infinite plus 1,000. Your one thing that you're scared of is going to hold you back from seeing the perspective of how beautiful it is to have multiple rebirths, gifts, whatever it is. Whether it's, you can absolutely love a person that passes on. And I think that some of the things that people have shared with me over the years is that they start to feel bad if they smile, laugh, or enjoy their life because they're supposed to be sad. And boy, that one gets me all the time. Like, in actuality, like, you're supposed to enjoy life, counterbalance, add more pennies to the joy jar than the sad jar. The sad jar is inevitable. It's going to happen. Life is sad. Human experiences is sad. Every time you risk loving somebody, you risk losing somebody. Every single thing has got this fleetingness to it. And I think that grief and mourning put in a wall for humans where we're like, I can't deal with the fleetingness. I need things to be fixed. And when grief and mourning hit you, you realize that there's no control, nothing is fixed. You're not like having that experience where you're not flexing that muscle in a way. Like you keep everything the same. So if anything changes, you're like, fuck that. And maybe that's why I have a bit of a resurrection addiction, is if I'm playing in the change role constantly, then like when something changes out of my control, I already know that's how it goes. And so a lot of what I would hope to offer in this space is a truth experiment. So is it true? Is it true that when I'm constantly dealing with changing on my own and I'm witnessing that I'm not in control, even though sometimes I feel like I'm the one in control of the change, so it makes me feel like I'm in control, but I'm practicing for like remembering that I'm not in control. I call that a truth experiment, because if you can ask yourself these questions of like, what is my relationship with grief and mourning, that truth, or just even getting curious on the answer, will give you a lot of information for everything. So it'd probably give you a lot of information on why you might be staying in a relationship that's not good for you, why so many of you are staying in jobs that you fucking hate, living in a body that you feel out of control over, maybe in an environment, in a community that doesn't serve you or serves only your lowest self, but not like your aspirations and your highest self. Getting clear on like why maybe you feel stuck in these things, because you can't get through that hump of change because you would miss all these other things. And right now I've been having a lot of conversations with, I've only lived in Florida most of my life, and now I live in Jackson, and I lived in Alaska for a couple of months, but like that's really it. 4 years in Jackson, Alaska, and Florida, and all in between I traveled a whole bunch. I was kind of scared to move, and when I got to Jackson, it's the most beautiful place I've ever seen in my entire life out of all my travels, and so I stayed. And it could be really easy to stay here forever and just be like, this is incredible, I found my spot. But the reality is, I like variety. And to say that like you can only have one pleasure and stick to this one thing that makes you happy, that might be for everybody else, but I am one who would like to experience more and variety and seeing the multiple perspectives of things, where you can hold the truth that this, and it's truth is not always or, it's usually an and then you get to the whole top of it of, you know, if you get to the space of it feels better for you to stay in one place for the rest of your life and yada yada, cultivate, and then I choose to live all over the world and yada yada. The reality is neither one of those are right or wrong. It's just the overarching truth that maybe you never ask, and that's okay. But this is for people who are, what is my life for? What meaning do I have? What's the purpose of it? And I would say possibly even at the top of both of those things, that we're here to just have an experience. So having an experience where you stay in one town for the rest of your life, or have an experience where you never stay in one town for the rest of your life, you're having a human experience. So you're not doing it right or wrong. You're just doing it. So if you can look at it like that, and for myself too, because the majority of people, if you surround yourself with people of that way, they find it safer, more comfortable, I guess, or that's maybe how they would describe it, to stay in one career, in one relationship, in one town. And again, with the whole idea of like how everybody says that we're supposed to do something is usually how we do it. But the truth experiment would be like, is this how I would like to do it? Like, would I like to do this differently? Yes. So here's where you can start to just kind of ask yourself is like, if they're doing it like that and I want to do it this other way, is it wrong? No, because we're just meant to have an experiment. So to experience, to try it, mine looks like this way. Theirs looks like this way. And if I were to ask myself, I had my closest friend growing up, we were girls together forever, but we haven't been really close in a long time just due to life circumstances. But when she passed recently, I was stuck with how to feel, because my friends were clearly publicly feeling certain ways, and like, you know, Facebook and Instagram, you share how you feel about somebody passing, and I couldn't even do that. And like the majority of my childhood memories are her, and I just could not bring myself to write about it and share how I was feeling. And I of course I had anger and I was scared, and a lot of stories came up, and she had come up in my MySpace a lot after, or even just around the time after she had passed. And I remember kind of asking myself, how do you want to deal with this grief? How do you want it to look or feel? And like, this is the space where I get really vulnerable. But in times of grief and mourning, I had also I've not done a good job. And I mean, we all have vices, and like, how do we get any type of relief from pain is like we use one of the vices or coping skills. And for a long time in my life, mine was sex, drugs, and probably risks and danger. Like those things make me feel a sensation of alive or numbing. I couldn't tell back then, but now I know that those are huge alive feelings for me. And when that happened, I had already begun to be like, I'm a different person. I'm not gonna, like, those options aren't even possible. I'm not even gonna remotely go that way. Like, I don't even really like alcohol. And now I know alcohol, like if I would have reached for alcohol, it just makes the situation so much worse for me the next day. So choosing and holding true perspectives of, yes, it's okay that you do this thing and everybody else does this thing, but I kind of think I'd like to do death and have this relationship a lot different. Like, I remember feeling really weird when my grandma passed away, and I didn't feel like devastated anguish and pain. I felt light and free and love, and I still, I could still remember and acknowledge the things about her that I loved. And so when I think about dealing with death now, and it's not perfect by any means, but I'd like to choose, and I don't know if I have to go down the path of, all the ways that sometimes sex, drugs, and risky behavior. I don't necessarily need to do that anymore. I can be witness to the pain that I have and notice that if I keep trying to push it away, it's going to last longer. And so I have different tools now to figure out and deal with how to deal with it, but it's still a process. Like, even sharing right now, I am in such a resurrection change, and it's easy for me to say that I don't really deserve to talk to anybody about it because I did this to myself. And that would happen for a lot of people. If you're even going to change jobs and you make a lot of money in one job, but it doesn't make you any wealthier in your soul and your essence, and you're having this time frame of switching over to something else, that is scary. And it's hard to do it alone. But you felt alone, and that's why you do it alone. And we end up having this. Here's the thing. Grief is universal. Human experience is universal. What you might be going through is 1,000 times more painful when you think you have to go through it all by yourself, and you're the only person that ever went through it. You are still having the same feelings. So in essence, like, if feelings are ice cream, your flavor is just vanilla and somebody else is having chocolate, but they are still having the experience of ice cream. They are still having the experience of pain, shame, mourning, and grief. And so maybe they take their ice cream with gummy bears and you take your ice cream with sprinkles, but that is how you're going to deal with your process. Is you're going to sex, drugs, and alcohol, and this other person is going to go be a monk on the top of the mountain. The other person is anger, right? Like, how many times have you seen somebody that you love lose somebody and they lose themselves? And so a lot of what I'm trying to acknowledge and bring to the table is that these death, sex, and money have a way of showing you who you are at all times and given moments where life is the hardest that it possibly can fucking be, and who do you show up as and how do you show up. And it makes sense that, like, in our lives, we're not going to do this perfect. Like, I wish somebody would let me punch them in the face when I'm angry over losing somebody I love. But even just noticing that, like, I have this deep anger inside that I want to hurt somebody because I'm hurt. That's impressive. That information is valid. It's valuable. So whatever you come around to, even if you notice that you're wanting to tell yourself that you're really strong for getting through some of these heartaches, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but maybe you're just numbing out. And so truth experiments are here for you to find yourself a little clearer. Thank you for being in my space and letting me share. just being a teacher in training. Have a beautiful and happy day.